The winter winds in the Appalachian Mountains have a way of whispering through the trees like ghosts remembering something terrible. In the early 1900s, deep in the coal country of Appalachian Mountains, there stood a small mining settlement outside Richmond that most maps barely acknowledged. It was a place built on coal dust, sweat, and the constant rumble of mining carts descending into darkness. The town had no official name on government records. Locals simply called it Black Hollow. During summer, it looked almost peaceful. Wooden cabins leaned against the hillsides, smoke curling from chimneys, miners returning home with blackened faces after 12-hour shifts underground. Children ran through muddy streets. Women cooked beans and cornbread over iron stoves. But when winter arrived, everything changed. Snow swallowed the roads. The mountains became walls of ice. Supply wagons stopped coming, and the town, already isolated, became completely cut off from the outside world. And that's when the feast began. At first, outsiders didn't believe the rumors. Stories began circulating in nearby towns that something deeply disturbing was happening in Black Hollow every winter. Hunters claimed they saw strange smoke rising from the valley during blizzards. Travelers said the miners refused to speak about the cold months. One man who passed through the region in 1912 described the town as quiet, too quiet. According to his diary, when he asked a miner what happened during winter, the man simply replied, "Pray the snow melts early." Then he walked away. Heaven. Life in Appalachian coal towns was already brutal. Most of the miners in Black Hollow worked for a large coal company that owned everything: the mines, the houses, even the store where workers bought food using company-issued tokens. The work was dangerous. Cave-ins, gas explosions, and collapsing tunnels were constant threats. Many miners died before reaching 40. Food was scarce even in the best months, so when winter storms trapped the town for weeks, sometimes months, things became desperate. Coal miners burned the very resource they dug from the earth just to stay warm. But coal couldn't fill empty stomachs, and hunger does something strange to people. It slowly erodes the line between survival and morality. Haida, the first recorded incident, happened during the winter of 1903. That year, the snowstorms were unlike anything the region had seen before. Drifts piled higher than rooftops. Entire cabins disappeared under blankets of white. Supply wagons never arrived. Food ran out. For weeks, the miners rationed what little they had: dried beans, salt pork, stale flour. Families boiled leather belts and tree bark just to trick their stomachs. Then one night, a miner named Thomas Keeler disappeared. No one reported it immediately. In a town where men often died in mines or wandered away drunk, disappearances weren't unusual. But something about this one felt different, because 3 days later, the town gathered for a feast. Smoke poured from the cookhouse chimney. The smell of roasting meat drifted through the frozen air. It was the first time in weeks anyone had eaten something substantial. But no one asked where the meat came from. And that silence became the town's darkest tradition. According to fragments of journals discovered decades later, the event slowly turned into a ritual. Every winter, when the snow sealed the town from the outside world, the miners held what they called the survival feast. Officially, it was meant to preserve the community. Unofficially, it was cannibalism. The rules were never written down, but everyone seemed to understand them. When food ran out, someone would be chosen, not randomly. The miners selected those who were already close to death-injured workers, outsiders passing through, or sometimes criminals the town had quietly imprisoned. To the miners, it wasn't murder. It was survival. At least, that's what they told themselves. What makes the story even darker is how normal it became. Children grew up knowing that winter meant more than snow and cold. It meant the feast. Families would gather in the cookhouse, lanterns flickering against wooden walls. Outside, the blizzard would howl through the valley. Inside, tables were laid out with plates and tin cups. No one spoke about the truth behind the meal. They simply ate and survived. But rumors began spreading beyond the mountains. By 1915, nearby towns started noticing something strange. Every spring, when the snow melted, miners from Black Hollow would arrive at trading posts to buy supplies. And every year, their population seemed slightly smaller, not dramatically, just enough to raise suspicion. A traveling preacher once asked a group of miners what happened to the missing people. The oldest miner stared at him for a long moment before saying something chilling. "Winter takes what it's owed." Ha 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 ha. Then came the winter that changed everything, the winter of 922. That year, a young journalist from Richmond traveled into the mountains chasing rumors of strange traditions among coal miners. His name was Daniel Harper. Unlike most outsiders, Harper didn't leave when the snow began falling. He stayed, and he kept writing. What he witnessed inside Black Hollow during that winter would become one of the most horrifying accounts ever recorded in Appalachian history. Because the feast of 1922 was different. That winter, the town didn't wait until starvation forced their hand. Instead, the miners prepared for the feast long before the snow arrived. Animals were slaughtered, food was stored, and yet the ritual continued, which meant something terrifying had happened. The feast was no longer about survival. It had become tradition. Hedda, Harper's journal, describes the night the miners gathered in the cookhouse. Snow battered the windows. Lanterns flickered across dozens of faces sitting around long wooden tables. Men, women, even children waited in silence. Then the door opened. Two miners dragged something inside wrapped in a burlap sheet. Harper wrote that the entire room stood up as if attending a ceremony. No prayers were spoken. No words were exchanged. But everyone knew what was about to happen, because the feast was about to begin. And this time, Harper was there to witness it. But what Harper discovered that night would reveal something far darker than cannibalism, something that suggested the miners weren't just surviving winter. They believed the ritual kept the mountain satisfied, that the feast itself was a kind of offering, and if it ever stopped, the mountain would take far more than one life. By the time spring arrived, Harper had filled 3 journals with his observations. But when he finally left Black Hollow, he carried more than just notes. He carried a secret that terrified him so much, he refused to publish his story for years. Because according to the final pages of his journal, the last feast of that winter didn't involve a stranger, or a dying miner, or even a criminal. The person chosen that night was someone the entire town knew. And when Harper realized who the miners had selected, he tried to escape. But the snow had already sealed the valley, and the miners had locked the doors. The snowstorm outside Black Hollow that night was unlike anything Daniel Harper had ever seen. Wind screamed through the narrow valley like a living thing. Snow slammed against the wooden walls of the cookhouse, rattling the windows as if something outside wanted to get in. Inside, however, the room was silent. Dozens of miners stood around the long wooden tables, lantern light flickering across faces hardened by years underground. Their expressions were calm, almost ceremonial. Harper sat frozen in his chair. His pen hovered above the page of his journal, but his hand refused to move, because whatever was wrapped inside that burlap sheet lying on the table in front of them was moving, just slightly. 2 miners stood on either side of the table like guards. The oldest man in the room slowly stepped forward. Everyone called him Elias Boone. Boone had been in Black Hollow longer than anyone could remember. His beard was gray, his face deeply lined, his eyes dark as coal. The miners treated him with a strange mixture of respect and fear. If Black Hollow had a leader, it was him. Boone rested both hands on the table and looked around the room. "The mountain gave us another winter," he said quietly. The miners nodded. "And the mountain must be fed." Harper felt a cold wave spread through his chest. He had heard whispers about this ritual during the weeks he'd spent in Black Hollow. At first he believed the stories were exaggerations, miners telling grim jokes about starvation, but now he understood. This was real, and everyone in the room believed in it. Boone reached down and pulled the burlap cloth away. Harper's breath caught in his throat. It was a man, alive. His hands were tied with thick rope. A cloth gag was stuffed into his mouth. Snow still clung to his coat as if he had been dragged through the storm. His eyes darted wildly around the room. He recognized the faces surrounding him, which meant he wasn't a stranger. Harper leaned forward slightly, trying to see clearly, and when he finally recognized the man, his stomach dropped. It was Samuel Pike. Pike worked the southern tunnel of the coal mine. Harper had spoken with him just 2 days earlier while interviewing miners about working conditions underground. Pike had seemed like any other laborer, quiet, exhausted, covered in coal dust. Now he was lying on the table like livestock. Harper's chair creaked as he stood up. "This is insane," he said. Every miner in the room slowly turned to look at him. Boone studied Harper with calm curiosity. "You're the writer," Boone said. "Yes," Harper replied, "and what you're doing here is murder." Boone tilted his head slightly. "No," he said. "It's survival." Harper gestured toward Pike. "You have stored food. I saw it myself. Barrels of salted meat, dried corn, sacks of flour. You don't need to do this." For a moment, Boone didn't answer. Then he said something that sent a chill down Harper's spine. "We stopped needing it years ago." The room remained silent. Harper frowned. "What do you mean?" Boone slowly walked toward one of the cookhouse windows. Outside, the blizzard roared across the valley, turning the world into a wall of white. "This town wasn't always like this," Boone said quietly. "Before the mines, before the company, the mountain belonged to older things." Harper shook his head. "You expect me to believe this is some kind of superstition?" Boone didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the dark mountains rising beyond the town. "First winter after the mines opened," Boone said, "we lost 12 men. Harper crossed his arms. "To accidents?" Boone looked back at him. "No." "Then what happened?" Boone's voice dropped to a whisper. "The mountain took them." A few miners in the room shifted uncomfortably. Harper felt frustration building. "People die in mines all the time," he said. "Cave-ins, gas pockets." Boone cut him off. "These men didn't die underground." Now Harper hesitated. "Where did they die?" Boone stared at him. "In their beds." The lantern flames flickered as the wind rattled the walls. "One night," Boone continued, "the snow came early, harder than any storm we'd seen. By morning, 12 miners were dead." Harper frowned. "Frozen?" Boone shook his head slowly. "They were, drained." The word hung in the air. Harper almost laughed. "Drained of what?" Boone's eyes didn't move. "Blood." The room was completely silent now. Harper opened his mouth to argue, but the miner's expression stopped him. They weren't joking. They believed every word. Boone walked back to the table. "We buried those men," he said. "But the next winter it happened again. 5 more. And the winter after that, 9. Harper's mind raced. "You're saying something in the mountain kills people unless you feed it?" Boone looked down at Samuel Pike struggling against the ropes. "We didn't know at first," Boone said. "Then one winter a man went missing during a storm. And," Boone's voice grew darker, "the deaths stopped." Harper stared at him. "That's coincidence." Boone slowly shook his head. "The next winter we chose someone." Harper felt sick. "And no one died? No one." The wind outside howled like a distant scream. Boone spread his hands, so we continued. Harper looked around the room. "And you've been doing this every winter since?" The miners nodded. Harper felt a deep unease crawling through his mind. "Why Pike?" he asked. Boone glanced at the man on the table. "He drew the stone." Harper blinked. "What stone?" Boone reached into his pocket and placed a small black rock on the table. Every miner carried one, Harper realized. Except one, Pike. Harper suddenly understood. "You made them draw lots," he said. Boone nodded. "The fairest way." Harper felt anger surge through him. "This is madness. There's no monster in the mountain." Boone studied him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You haven't heard it yet." Harper frowned. "Heard what?" At that moment, the room went silent. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. And then Harper heard it. A deep rumble echoed through the valley. Not thunder, not wind, something else. It sounded like breathing, low, slow, massive. The wooden floor vibrated slightly beneath Harper's boots. The miners exchanged nervous glances. Boone looked toward the mountain. "It knows," he whispered. Harper felt the blood drain from his face. Another rumble rolled through the valley, this one louder. The lanterns trembled. From somewhere far above the town came a deep, cracking sound like ice splitting across a frozen lake. Harper ran to the window. What the hell was that? Outside, the mountainside shifted. Snow cascaded down the slope in a roaring avalanche. The ground shook again. Behind him, Boone spoke quietly. "The mountain grows hungry when we delay." Harper spun around. "You're blaming natural disasters on some imaginary creature?" Boone walked toward him slowly. "You'll understand soon enough." Harper looked back at Samuel Pike. The man's eyes were wide with terror. He shook his head violently, begging through the gag. Harper's chest tightened. "I won't let this happen," Harper said. Boone sighed. "You don't have a choice." Harper took a step back. "Yes, I do." He turned toward the door. "I'm leaving, and when I reach Richmond, I'm bringing the authorities back here." A few miners chuckled quietly. Boone didn't move. "Go ahead," Boone said. Harper grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. The storm outside slammed into him like a wall. Wind howled through the doorway, throwing snow across the floor. Harper stepped outside, then froze. The valley below the town was gone. Where there had once been a narrow road leading through the mountains, there was now nothing but collapsed rock and snow. The avalanche had sealed the only path out. Harper stared into the blizzard. They were trapped. Slowly, he closed the door. Behind him, the miners had returned to their places around the table. Boone nodded toward the chair Harper had been sitting in. "You might as well stay," Boone said. Harper didn't move. His heart pounded as the reality sank in. The storm would last days, maybe weeks, and no one in this room was going to stop what was about to happen. Boone picked up a knife from the table. The blade gleamed in the lantern light. Samuel Pike thrashed wildly against the ropes. Harper took a step forward. "You don't have to do this," he said desperately. Boone looked at him. "Yes," Boone replied quietly. "We do." Outside, the mountain rumbled again, and this time something deep within the earth answered. Harper would later write in his journal that the sound did not resemble an animal, or wind, or shifting rock. It sounded like something ancient waking beneath the mountain, something enormous, and something hungry. The miners heard it too. Their faces went pale. Boone closed his eyes. "The mountain calls," he whispered. Then he raised the knife, and the feast began.